A 6-year-old girl had no idea that a single innocent question was about to expose a secret buried for 7 long years. Little Violet glanced around the elegant boardroom before her eyes settled on the confident woman standing at the head of the table. In a calm voice, as if asking something ordinary, she smiled and said, "Ma'am, my dad has a ring exactly like yours." The room froze. Every executive around the polished table fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Eleanor Whitmore, the powerful CEO who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without ever losing her composure, suddenly felt the color drain from her face. Her fingers instinctively tightened around the white gold ring engraved with a tiny constellation. Only 2 identical rings had ever been handcrafted. One rested on Eleanor's hand. The second was supposed to have disappeared forever with the company's co-founder, a man everyone believed had died 7 years earlier. Yet at that very moment, just outside the conference room, a maintenance worker stood quietly holding his toolbox. Dust covered his work clothes. The same constellation ring gleamed on his finger. Neither of them knew that one curious child had just opened a door that years of carefully hidden lies could no longer keep shut. That same morning, before the city had fully awakened, Violet sat on the kitchen counter, swinging her little feet while finishing her cereal. Like every day, her mind was overflowing with questions. "Dad, why do birds always know where to fly? Why do honeybees have stripes? And do you think Mrs. Parker's old dog gets lonely when she's at work?" Sebastian Cole answered each one with a patient smile while lacing up his worn work boots. Just as he reached for his jacket, Violet noticed the familiar white gold ring on his right hand. "Dad, why do you always look at your ring before leaving home?" Sebastian paused for a brief second. His thumb brushed across the tiny Orion constellation engraved into the smooth band. Hidden inside were a few delicate words that only he had ever read. "It reminds me of a promise I should never forget," he replied softly. Satisfied with the answer, Violet hugged her stuffed rabbit and skipped toward the door. Their apartment was small and old, tucked away on the 3rd floor of a building without an elevator. Life wasn't luxurious, but it was peaceful. After dropping Violet at school, Sebastian drove his aging pickup toward Orion Tower, the company he had once helped create, and the same company that no longer remembered his name. Orion Tower dominated the downtown skyline, its glass walls glowing with the morning sun. To most people, it represented innovation and success. To Sebastian, it represented something far more personal. Years ago, the company's first blueprint had been sketched on scraps of paper spread across his tiny kitchen table. The name, Orion, wasn't chosen by a marketing team. It was inspired by the constellation engraved on the matching rings he and Claire had designed as a symbol of their shared dream. Now, instead of entering through the executive lobby, Sebastian walked through the service entrance wearing a contractor's uniform and carrying a toolbox. No one recognized the man who had once helped build the company from nothing. His assignment was simple: assist with electrical upgrades on the 35th floor for the next few weeks. Several floors above, CEO Eleanor Whitfield was already leading back-to-back meetings. Known for her sharp judgment and calm leadership, she rarely allowed emotions to influence business decisions. The white gold Orion ring on her finger had been passed to her by Victor Lang after she officially took control of the company. He had told her it once belonged to the late co-founder, a visionary whose story had supposedly ended 7 years earlier. She accepted that version of history without ever questioning it. Neither Sebastian nor Eleanor realized that fate had already begun pulling them toward the same truth, and there was no turning back anymore. By late morning, an unexpected transformer failure cut power to Violet's school, forcing administrators to dismiss students early. Parents were called one by one, and when the office finally reached Sebastian, he was repairing electrical lines high above the city. He missed the first call. The moment he checked his phone, he returned it and learned what had happened. With no way to leave the job immediately, he contacted his longtime friend and attorney, Matthew Holt. "I'm stuck in traffic," Matthew said. There's been a major accident on the bridge. I can't reach the school for at least 40 minutes. Sebastian frowned. Can they keep Violet in the office until then? They'll try. For exactly 11 minutes they did. Curiosity soon got the better of Violet. While the receptionist was busy helping other parents, she noticed an elevator door slide open nearby. Thinking it might lead to somewhere interesting, she quietly stepped inside. The highest button she could reach was marked 38. With a tiny smile, she pressed it. The elevator climbed silently toward the executive floor, carrying a little girl who had no idea she was only moments away from changing several lives forever. The elevator doors slid open onto the 38th floor. Violet stepped into a quiet hallway lined with glass walls, polished floors, and modern artwork. Unlike the noisy streets outside, everything here felt calm and carefully controlled. Holding her stuffed rabbit close, she wandered forward, fascinated by the unfamiliar surroundings. At the end of the corridor, she noticed a large wooden door that wasn't completely closed. Curious, she gently pushed it open. Inside, a board meeting was in full swing. 12 senior executives sat around a long conference table while Eleanor Whitfield stood beside a large digital screen, presenting the company's next expansion strategy. The unexpected sound of the door interrupted her sentence. Every head turned. For a brief moment, complete silence filled the room. Eleanor looked at the little girl standing in the doorway and spoke with surprising calm. I think you're looking for someone else, sweetheart. Instead of answering, Violet's attention drifted to the elegant white gold ring on Eleanor's hand. Her eyes widened with recognition. Without the slightest hesitation, she smiled and said, Ma'am, my dad has a ring exactly like that. The atmosphere changed instantly. Several board members exchanged confused glances, while Eleanor's confident expression slowly disappeared. For the first time in years, a simple sentence had shaken a truth she never imagined could be questioned. No one spoke for several seconds. Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on the little girl. What did you just say? She asked, her voice calm but noticeably softer than before. Violet pointed innocently toward the ring. The little stars on it. My dad has the same one. He wears it every single day. A quiet murmur spread across the boardroom. Eleanor slowly looked down at her own hand. Victor Lang had once told her that only 2 of these rings had ever existed. One belonged to her. The other had belonged to Orion's late co-founder, a man officially declared dead 7 years ago. So, what's your father's name? Eleanor asked. Before Violet could answer, the boardroom door opened again. A man in a gray contractor's uniform stepped inside, slightly out of breath. Dust covered his sleeves, and a hard hat rested beneath his arm. His eyes immediately found Violet. There you are, little bird, Sebastian said gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I've been looking everywhere. Only then did he lift his eyes toward Eleanor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Eleanor's attention drifted to Sebastian's right hand. The same white gold ring. The same Orion constellation. The same unmistakable design. A strange silence settled over the room as both of them realized this meeting was far from ordinary, and neither knew what the other was hiding. Sebastian gently guided Violet toward the door. Come on, little bird, he said with a reassuring smile. Let's get you downstairs. Realizing she had interrupted something important, Violet looked back at the room. I'm sorry, she said shyly. My teacher says I should always apologize if I disturb people. A few board members exchanged awkward smiles as the father and daughter quietly left. The heavy door closed behind them. For several long seconds, Eleanor remained standing at the front of the room, unable to move. Her eyes lingered on the door before she finally picked up the presentation remote again. Let's continue, she said. The meeting resumed, but her focus was gone. Without realizing it, she kept rubbing the Orion ring with her thumb. The moment the board session ended, Eleanor instructed her assistant to bring her the complete personnel file for the electrical contractor named Sebastian Cole. Within minutes, the documents appeared on her desk. His employee badge photo confirmed he was the same man who had entered the boardroom. She studied every detail before unlocking a drawer she rarely opened. Inside rested Orion Systems' earliest corporate records, along with several confidential files Victor Lang had entrusted to her years earlier. As she turned the first few pages, one name immediately caught her attention: Sebastian Cole, listed beside the title co-founder and chief technology officer. In the margin, written in Victor's own handwriting, were 4 chilling words: "Missing, presumed deceased." Eleanor slowly leaned back in her chair. If the file was true, then who had been working inside her building all this time? Eleanor couldn't take her eyes off the old company records. She compared the faded signature on the founding documents with the recent contractor badge photo lying beside them. The resemblance was undeniable. Yet the official file still described Sebastian Cole as a man who had vanished 7 years earlier and was later declared dead. She opened another envelope Victor Lang had left in her care before his passing. Inside were handwritten notes, acquisition papers, and a letter warning her to protect Orion's future. Nothing in those documents explained how its co-founder could suddenly be alive. Instead of alerting the board, Eleanor made a different decision. Using her personal phone, she sent Sebastian a brief message. "I'd like to meet. Not as your CEO, but as someone searching for the truth. Bring whatever evidence you have." Hours later, Sebastian read the text while sitting inside his old pickup. Violet was asleep in the back seat, hugging her stuffed rabbit after an exhausting day. He showed the message to Matthew Holt. Matthew read it carefully before looking at his friend. "She's starting to question the story she's been told," he said quietly. "But don't walk into that meeting empty-handed." Sebastian nodded. "There are still original company records hidden in the archive server on the 35th floor," he replied. "If I can recover them first, the truth won't depend on anyone's memory." For the first time in years, the path toward justice finally seemed within reach, but every step from now on would carry serious risks. The following evening, Sebastian chose a quiet coffee shop a block away from Orion Tower. He arrived early. Violet sat at a nearby table with her coloring book and a cup of warm apple juice, happily drawing while wearing her tiny headphones. At exactly 6 o'clock, Eleanor walked in. For the first time, she wasn't dressed like a CEO. Without the boardroom and business meetings around her, she looked more like someone carrying unanswered questions than authority. She placed a copy of Orion's original incorporation papers on the table. "According to these records," she began, "you helped found Orion Systems. 7 years ago you disappeared, and everyone believed you were dead." Sebastian quietly nodded. "I never chose to disappear." Eleanor studied him carefully. "If that's true, why spend years working here as an electrician instead of fighting publicly for your company?" Sebastian wrapped both hands around his coffee cup before answering. "Because the evidence disappeared before I did. Without proof, no one would have believed my story." He looked through the cafe window toward Orion Tower. "The original board records still exist. They're hidden inside the archive server on the 35th floor. Once I recover them, the truth won't rely on my words alone." For the first time since receiving Victor's files, Eleanor began to realize she hadn't inherited the complete history of Orion. Only the version someone wanted her to believe. Eleanor remained silent for a long moment. "If someone truly erased your past," she said, "then the company I've been leading may have been built on a lie." "I don't blame you," Sebastian replied calmly. "You accepted the records you were given. I would have done the same." His answer caught her off guard. She had expected anger, accusations, perhaps even resentment. Instead, she found a man more interested in the truth than revenge. After a brief pause, Sebastian spoke again. 7 years ago, my wife Claire and I were driving home after a board meeting. Someone tampered with our car. The crash took her life. His voice remained steady, but the pain behind it was impossible to hide. I survived, but I lost nearly 2 years of my memory. By the time everything started coming back, Orion had changed hands, the records had been rewritten, and everyone believed I was gone forever. Eleanor lowered her eyes. I'm truly sorry, she whispered. Sebastian nodded once. I don't want the company back, he said. I only want the truth restored, and Claire's contribution recognized. She helped build Orion from the very beginning. For the first time, Eleanor realized this wasn't just a corporate dispute. It was a man fighting to reclaim a history that had been stolen from his family. On the drive home, Violet rested her head against the window, quietly watching the city lights blur past. After several minutes, she looked at Sebastian. Dad, is the lady from the big office okay? Sebastian glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Why would you ask that? She kept looking at your ring, Violet replied. Like she was trying to remember something. A faint smile crossed Sebastian's face. Maybe she was. So, did she figure it out? He took a slow breath before answering. Not everything. But she's beginning to ask the right questions. Violet seemed satisfied. Hugging her stuffed rabbit, she closed her eyes and drifted to sleep. The next morning, trouble arrived much sooner than expected. Charles Brennan, Orion's influential board chairman, walked straight into Eleanor's office carrying a sealed folder. I've reviewed the security reports, he said, placing it on her desk. The contractor named Sebastian Cole is dangerous. He has a history of using false identities after suffering a mental breakdown. I recommend terminating his contract immediately. Eleanor opened the folder without saying a word. As she scanned the documents, one question echoed in her mind. If Charles truly believed Sebastian was just an ordinary contractor, why had he already prepared an entire case against him before anyone had asked for one? Charles leaned forward, his expression calm but calculated. I've spent years protecting this company, he said. Don't let one stranger destroy everything we've built. Eleanor closed the folder and met his eyes. Interesting, she replied. You seem unusually prepared for someone who's supposed to be just another contractor. For the first time, Charles's confident smile weakened. Some risks are easier to stop before they become problems. After he left, Eleanor immediately placed a legal hold on every archived file stored on the 35th floor. No records could be altered, deleted, or removed without her direct approval. She didn't call Sebastian. She simply sent him a short message. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the board will know everything. Late that night, Sebastian returned to Orion Tower wearing his maintenance uniform. While the night crew worked on another section of the building, he quietly made his way toward the secured archive room. For weeks, he had memorized security patrols, access codes, and maintenance routes. Tonight was his only chance. Standing outside the locked server cabinet, he took a deep breath. If the original files were still there, they could expose 7 years of deception. If they weren't, he would lose the only proof that could clear his name forever. The hallway was almost silent. Only the faint hum of servers and distant footsteps echoed through the maintenance level. Sebastian slipped on a pair of work gloves and unlocked the service panel he had spent weeks studying. Behind it lay the hidden access point leading to Orion's archive server. He connected a secure storage drive and began searching through years of untouched records. Minutes felt like hours. Every passing second increased the risk of someone discovering him. Finally, a folder appeared on the screen. Board meeting, March 12th, original records. His heartbeat quickened. The official copy claimed he had willingly transferred his ownership before disappearing. But the original files told a completely different story. The meeting minutes clearly showed Sebastian opposing the sale of Orion's core technology. Despite his objections, the proposal had been forced through by a majority vote. There was more. A forensic report attached to the archive suggested that the ownership transfer document had been digitally altered after the meeting. Sebastian immediately copied every file onto the encrypted drive. Before disconnecting, he noticed one final folder labeled Private Correspondence. Inside were several emails exchanged between Charles Brennan and Victor Lang in the weeks leading up to the accident. One short message stood out above the rest. "Handle it before the next board meeting." Sebastian stared at the screen. Those 6 words changed everything. This was no longer just about a stolen company. It was beginning to look like a carefully planned conspiracy. Just before midnight, Sebastian left Orion Tower through the service exit with the encrypted drive hidden inside his toolbox. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove straight to Matthew Holt's office. Matthew was already waiting. Without wasting a second, they opened the recovered files and examined every document one by one. The evidence was stronger than either of them had expected. The original board minutes, server timestamps, and email records all pointed toward the same conclusion: someone had deliberately erased Sebastian's role from Orion's history. Matthew looked up from the screen. "This is enough to reopen everything," he said. "But we'll need to present it carefully. Charles won't surrender without a fight." The next morning, Orion's board members gathered for an emergency meeting called by Eleanor. Charles entered confidently with his legal team, convinced he still controlled the narrative. A few minutes later, Matthew walked into the boardroom carrying a thick portfolio. Sebastian wasn't with him. He had chosen to stay outside. "This isn't about revenge," he had told Matthew earlier. "It's about letting the facts speak for themselves." As the first document was placed before the board, the room fell silent. For the first time in 7 years, the truth was no longer a rumor. It was written in black and white, waiting for everyone to read it. Matthew stood before the board and opened the portfolio. "Everything you're about to see comes directly from Orion's archived records," he said. "These files have been verified and remain untouched." One document after another was passed around the table. The original incorporation papers. The complete March 12th board minutes. System logs showing when critical files had been altered. And finally, a forensic report questioning the authenticity of Sebastian's supposed ownership transfer. The atmosphere grew heavier with every page. Several board members quietly reread the documents, comparing them with the versions stored in their own records. The differences were impossible to ignore. Charles Brennan remained composed, but the confidence on his face slowly faded. "This proves nothing," he said firmly. "Anyone with enough technical knowledge could have manipulated those files." Before anyone could respond, Matthew placed one final document on the table. It contained an independent forensic analysis confirming the archive files had never been modified after they were originally stored. The timestamps, digital signatures, and server history all matched. Eleanor slowly looked around the room. "No one makes a decision yet," she said. "But from this moment forward, this board will investigate every detail, without assumptions and without protecting anyone." For the first time, Charles realized the story he had controlled for years was beginning to slip beyond his reach. The meeting paused while independent experts reviewed the digital evidence one final time. No one spoke. Every eye remained fixed on the reports spread across the conference table. Nearly an hour later, the lead investigator closed the final folder. "The archive records are authentic," he announced. "There is no evidence that these files were altered after their original creation." A wave of quiet disbelief swept through the room. Several board members exchanged uneasy glances. Charles finally broke the silence. "Even if these records are genuine," he argued, "they don't prove I orchestrated any conspiracy." Matthew calmly stood again. "You're right," he said. "The board minutes alone don't." He slid another sealed envelope across the table. "This does." Inside were financial transfers, internal communications, and recovered emails linking Charles to a series of hidden transactions made shortly before Sebastian's disappearance. One payment, in particular, had been routed through a shell company that no longer existed. Eleanor studied each page carefully before looking toward Charles. Would you like to explain why these payments were authorized from accounts under your control? For the first time that morning, Charles had no immediate answer. The silence that followed spoke louder than any defense he could have offered. It was becoming painfully clear that the investigation had uncovered far more than a corporate dispute. It had exposed a trail that could now lead to criminal charges. The board reached its decision before noon. By unanimous vote, Charles Brennan was suspended from every executive responsibility pending a full legal investigation. His authority within Orion was frozen immediately, and outside authorities were notified to review the evidence. Charles remained seated, staring silently at the documents that had unraveled years of carefully protected deception. He understood there was no easy way back. Outside the boardroom, Sebastian waited in the parking structure beside his pickup truck. Violet sat on the tailgate, quietly drawing little fish on the back of an old receipt, completely unaware of the battle taking place upstairs. A few minutes later, Matthew called. "It's over," he said. "The board accepted the evidence. Charles has been removed, and the investigation is officially underway." Sebastian closed his eyes for a moment. Not in celebration, but in relief. Years of silence had finally begun to lift. "Dad?" Violet asked, looking up from her drawing. "Can we go home now?" He smiled warmly. "Yeah, little bird." As they drove away from Orion Tower, Sebastian glanced once at the white gold ring on his finger. For years, it had been the only reminder that his past was real. Today, for the first time, he no longer needed the ring to prove the truth. The truth had finally found its own voice. Later that afternoon, Eleanor found Sebastian standing alone near the observation corridor overlooking the city. The legal teams had already left, and Orion Tower had begun returning to its normal routine. For the first time, the building felt strangely quiet. "The board has asked me to make you an offer," Eleanor said as she approached. "They want you back. Your ownership can be restored, and they're prepared to give you a leadership position." Sebastian looked through the glass at the skyline that had once represented every dream he and Claire had shared. After a long silence, he smiled gently. "I appreciate it," he said. "But that's not the life I want anymore." Eleanor looked surprised. "You spent years fighting for this company." "I fought for the truth," Sebastian replied. "Not for a title." He explained that he planned to start a small engineering firm of his own, a place where innovation mattered more than corporate politics. "There is one thing I do want," he added. Eleanor nodded. "Claire Cole deserves to be recognized in Orion's history. She helped shape this company from the very beginning. Her name should never have been erased." Without hesitation, Eleanor extended her hand. "You have my word." This time, the promise wasn't written in a contract. It was built on honesty, something Orion had been missing for far too long. 3 weeks later, Orion Systems quietly updated its official company history. Most employees barely noticed the announcement. But to Sebastian, it meant everything. A new paragraph had been added beneath the company's founding story. It acknowledged Claire Cole as one of the earliest contributors, recognizing her role in shaping Orion's original vision and preparing the first business plan that helped transform an ambitious idea into a real company. There were no dramatic speeches, no press conference. Just the truth finally taking its rightful place. That evening, Sebastian read the update on his phone while sitting outside Violet's room. He smiled, then gently locked the screen. For the first time in years, he felt that Claire's voice had finally been heard. Meanwhile, Eleanor stood alone in her office, looking out across the city lights. She realized leadership wasn't only about making profitable decisions. Sometimes it meant admitting that history had been written incorrectly, and having the courage to correct it. Across town, Charles Brennan faced a very different future. investigators had begun reviewing every financial record connected to his administration. The deeper they looked, the more unanswered questions emerged. The chapter Charles had spent years controlling was finally over. A new one had begun, built on honesty instead of deception. Nearly 6 weeks passed before Sebastian heard another knock on his apartment door. When he opened it, he was surprised to find Eleanor standing there, holding a small bakery box with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Someone told me this apartment serves the best homemade pasta in the city." Sebastian looked toward Violet, who immediately tried to hide a guilty smile. "I might have mentioned that," she admitted. Everyone laughed. Eleanor stepped inside, and Violet eagerly pulled her toward the kitchen window to show off the tiny herb pots she had been taking care of. "This one is basil," Violet explained proudly. "And this one is rosemary. Dad says plants grow better if you talk to them." Eleanor smiled. "Then they must hear wonderful conversations every day." While the two chatted, Sebastian returned to the stove, listening to Violet excitedly introduce her stuffed rabbit and explain all of its imaginary adventures. For the first time in a long while, the apartment felt brighter. The evening wasn't about business, court cases, or old betrayals. It was simply 3 people sharing dinner, stories, and laughter. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with winning a battle. Sometimes it begins with an ordinary meal shared around a small kitchen table. After dinner, Violet insisted that everyone stay for dessert. With complete seriousness, she carefully sliced the apple cake into 3 uneven pieces and proudly declared that the biggest one belonged to the guest. Eleanor laughed. "I think your dad deserves that piece." Violet shook her head. "Nope. Dad says guests always come first." Sebastian smiled, realizing she had remembered something he had told her years ago. As the evening came to an end, Sebastian walked Eleanor to the apartment door. Before leaving, she glanced at the familiar Orion ring resting on his hand. "I've put mine away," she said quietly. Sebastian looked at her with surprise. "You didn't have to." "I know," Eleanor replied. "But every time I looked at it, I was reminded of a history that never truly belonged to me. Until it finds its rightful place, I'd rather earn the future than borrow the past." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eleanor extended her hand. "Thank you, not just for uncovering the truth, but for choosing forgiveness when you had every reason not to." Sebastian shook her hand. "The truth gives people a chance to make better choices. What they do after that is what matters." Eleanor smiled and quietly left. As Sebastian closed the apartment door, he realized something unexpected. The weight he had carried for 7 long years was finally beginning to disappear. For the first time in a very long while, home truly felt like home. That night, after tucking Violet into bed, Sebastian stood quietly at her bedroom door. She had already fallen asleep, still holding her stuffed rabbit close, one foot sticking out from beneath the blanket, just as it always did. He couldn't help but smile. It amazed him that the biggest turning point of his life had begun with a single innocent sentence spoken by a 6-year-old girl. She hadn't understood boardrooms, corporate politics, or hidden conspiracies. She had simply noticed 2 matching rings and told the truth. Sebastian gently looked at the white gold band on his own finger. Years ago, it had represented hope, sacrifice, and a dream he and Claire had built together. Then it became the only reminder that his past had ever existed. Now it meant something different. Not revenge. Not victory. But survival. Across the city, Eleanor sat alone in her office for one final hour before heading home. She opened the official company archive and reread Orion's corrected history. For the first time since becoming CEO, she felt she wasn't protecting a company built on secrets anymore. She was leading one willing to face the truth. Outside, Orion Tower stood quietly against the night sky. The building hadn't changed, but the people inside it had. And sometimes, that's the greatest transformation of all. The following Monday, life at Orion Systems looked almost normal again. Employees hurried through the lobby with coffee in hand, meetings filled the conference rooms, and the elevators moved as endlessly as ever. But beneath the routine, something had changed. Trust had become more valuable than profit. Transparency mattered more than appearances. Eleanor introduced new policies requiring every major corporate decision to be independently reviewed, ensuring that no single executive could ever rewrite the company's history again. Many welcomed the changes. Others quietly realized the old ways were gone forever. Across town, Sebastian unlocked the door to a modest office with fresh paint and a simple metal sign above the entrance. Cole Engineering Solutions. There were no luxurious conference rooms. No towering glass headquarters. Just a small team, honest work, and a chance to build something the right way. As he arranged the first set of blueprints on his desk, Violet ran inside carrying a handmade drawing. "Look, Dad!" The picture showed 3 smiling people standing beneath a sky filled with bright stars. At the top she had written, "Dreams belong to the people who never stop believing." Sebastian carefully pinned the drawing to the office wall. Out of everything he had regained, that simple picture felt like the greatest reward of all. Months later, Orion's annual shareholders gathering filled the company's main auditorium. Unlike previous years, the atmosphere felt different. There were no exaggerated promises or carefully rehearsed speeches. Instead, Eleanor chose to begin with a simple statement. "A company earns success through innovation," she said, "but it earns respect by telling the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable." The audience responded with quiet applause. Among those seated near the back was Sebastian, accompanied by Violet. He hadn't come as an executive or a shareholder. He came simply as someone who had finally found peace with the past. As the presentation ended, Eleanor invited him onto the stage. She handed him a small framed copy of Orion's original founding certificate, now fully restored with every rightful name in its proper place. The room rose in a standing ovation. Sebastian accepted the frame with a grateful smile before looking toward Violet. She waved excitedly from her seat, her stuffed rabbit resting on her lap. In that moment, he realized something important. Recognition wasn't measured by applause or titles. It was measured by knowing that the truth would outlive every lie that had tried to erase it. That evening, Sebastian and Violet walked home beneath a sky where the Orion constellation shone clearly above the city. Violet looked up and smiled. "Dad, those are the same stars on your ring." Sebastian nodded. "They are. Will you ever take it off?" He gently turned the white gold band on his finger before answering. "Maybe someday. But not yet." "Why?" "Because it reminds me that no matter how many people try to hide the truth, it always finds its way back." Violet thought about that for a moment before slipping her small hand into his. "I think Mom would be proud of you." Sebastian felt his eyes fill with emotion, but this time they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of peace. As they continued walking, Orion Tower stood quietly in the distance, not as a symbol of everything he had lost, but as proof that truth can survive even the darkest chapters. The company had reclaimed its history. Claire's name had been restored. Justice had finally begun. And Sebastian had discovered that the greatest victory wasn't getting his old life back. It was building a better one with the people who still stood beside him. Sometimes, the smallest voice speaks the greatest truth. And in this story, it was the voice of a 6-year-old girl that changed everything. The end.